Hello and welcome to the third webinar in the Soy Dialogues series hosted by GIZ and partners. Today's webinar is titled Engaging German Companies with Deforestation-Free Supply Chains. So a very warm welcome to you all who are joining from all around the world. My name's James Allen. I'm director of OLAB, a Brazilian strategy consultancy, and I will moderate today's webinar. I said it was the third webinar, and just by way of a reminder, the first two of these webinars around deforestation-free supply chains focused on the upstream players and actors, looking at production and origination with producers and traders, mainly out of Brazil. And I'm delighted that today we're exploring the downstream actions of consumers, sourcing companies, including retailers, brands, and consumer goods companies as well. And obviously all this in the context of the EU deforestation regulation and multiple efforts to address climate change. We have today a really exciting agenda, and I'm going to ask my colleague just to put it up on the screen now, but I'm delighted to be joined here by colleagues from WWF Germany, including Michelle Neuhaus and Jana Berschneider, colleagues from Nextra Consulting, Jannica Ofterdinger, and colleagues from Kaufland, Melanie Banvilla, all of whom are going to be sharing their experiences of working to define and implement policies on deforestation-free supply chains from the downstream perspective that I described earlier today. The way we've organized today's webinar is myself and Petra Ascher from GIZ will say a few words of introduction and context. We'll then ask our four speakers to speak for around 10 minutes each, sharing some key information about that experience of deforestation-free policies in supply chains. And then we have about 30 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So wherever you're joining from the world, I would just encourage you to use the chat function to share questions that you may want to ask to our panelists, and we'll try and organize those throughout the webinar today as well. So we'll have a period where we can ask them questions as well. What I think is really interesting, if you're happy to do so, is just introduce yourself now in chat. It's always interesting to know who else is here. We've got more than 50 people already on this webinar and more joining. So just use the chat function where you can send a message to everyone rather than just to panelists. And you can put your name, maybe even your title, I'm typing mine now, and your organization, maybe even where you're currently calling from. And put that into chat so we know who else is here, and it'll be really exciting to interact with you further down the line as well. Just before I hand over to Petra Ascher from GIZ, let me say a couple of practical words of information. We are recording today's webinar, so we will make it available to colleagues throughout the GIZ partner network as well, through RTRS and other of our partners that are on the call today. We also have translation available from English to Portuguese. So I'm just going to say a few words in Portuguese now for our Portuguese speakers who may wish to use the translation function. Colegas que estão escutando do Brasil ou gostariam de escutar em tradução, temos uma opção de tradução simultânea do inglês para o português, escolhendo aqui a bolinha de interpretation, clicando e escolhendo o canal português. E se você clica no canal de português, vocês deveriam escutar uma tradução direta do inglês para o português. So just a reminder to Portuguese speakers, if you'd like to listen to the webinar in translation, we have that option available today. And I see that people are introducing themselves. Wonderful to see we've got people from Finland, Sweden, Sao Paulo, Brazil, lots of people from Brazil, fantastic. Earthworm, Sao Paulo as well. So keep those messages coming in. It's really exciting to see where people are joining from and know that we've got a real interest in this webinar from all around the world. Fantastic. So really excited about today. And without further ado, let me hand over to Petra Ascher, who's the project director at GIZ, to say a few words of welcome. Welcome, Petra. Petra, you're on mute. Just to ask you to come off mute.
Obrigada, James. Bom dia, Brasil. Bom dia, Germany. E bom dia, Europe, né? Temos aqui também pessoas e colegas de Finlândia e por ser de outros países. Eu sou a diretora do AgriChains em Brasil. O AgriChains da GIZ é um programa global A gente trabalha em vários países com vários produtos daquelas cadeias internacionais, como café, palm oil, cacau, borracha, soja, entre outros. E aqui no Brasil, a gente trabalha com soja. Mas a gente não trabalha só com soja em Maranhão e Mato Piba. A gente tem um enfoque territorial, que significa que queremos fortalecer as cadeias de produção que existem em uma região. Então, estamos focados para a cadeia de soja, por um lado, mas, por outro lado, também para cadeias da socio-bio, da agricultura familiar, como babaçu, jaborandi e canaúba. Hoje, falamos sobre soja. E nosso objetivo principal é tornar a cadeia de soja mais sustentável. A cadeia de soja é muito longe, tem vários atores, desde a produção até o consumo, e nós estamos convencidas que o diálogo é o mais importante, e trocar experiências, trocar demandas, o que vocês precisam, o que a gente deve comprovar, o que realmente o cliente quer e como a gente pode fazer a rastreabilidade downstream e upstream. E isso demanda muito comunicação. Eu estou feliz, agora temos 56 pessoas nesse diálogo. Eu estou feliz que vejo muitos nomes que participaram já a primeira vez e continuam a participar e continuam a ser interessados de dialogar, de trocar experiências. Mas também estou feliz sobre novos participantes, especificamente da Alemanha. Eu não quero nombrar, porque tenho sempre medo de esquecer alguém. Eu vejo aqui Kaufland, WWF na Alemanha, mas, na verdade, eu tenho sempre medo de esquecer alguém. Mas sejam bem-vindos, porque eu acho que a sua participação é muito, muito importante. É tão importante, né, porque a gente tem que dialogar. O que vocês precisam das empresas da Alemanha, o que vocês precisam saber dos produtores, o que eles devem fornecer para vocês, como vocês organizam sua rastreabilidade downstream, e também aqueles que produzem, como vocês realizam sua rastreabilidade upstream. Então, isso é muito, muito importante. Então, estou muito feliz que isso aconteça agora. Eu gostaria de agradecer vocês, participantes, nossos parceiros, RTRS, WWF e todos que organizam esses webinários. Obrigada também, James Ellen, por nos ajudar, né, agora no terceiro webinário sobre soja. E, finalmente, eu desejo uma boa conversa, diálogo muito interessante e, assim, tudo de bom. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Petra. Thank you, Petra. Back to English here, and we will be carrying on now in English. So just a reminder that the translation function is available if you'd like to carry on listening to us in Portuguese. So I think Petra has set out very clearly there the broader aims of the AgriChains project. What's interesting about the AgriChains project, which started in 2019 through the German government, is its aim to, in addition to eliminate deforestation, also to eliminate human rights violations in agricultural supply chains. So it has both a social and an environmental aspect. And I'm delighted to see here that we've got people joining us from the state of Maranhão, including from the Porto de Itaqui and other colleagues that I know work in Maranhão. So fantastic that we have colleagues from Maranhão here, because the focus of this project in Brazil specifically has been the Mato Pi region, which are the three states of Maranhão, Tocantins and Piauí, part of the deforestation frontier in Brazil. And then a particular focus on Maranhão, working with some of those partners that Petra has mentioned, including WWF, RTRS, Abiovi, CLI, and the University of Maranhão Federal. The project, in addition to focusing on Maranhão, also has a particular interest in the Itaqui corridor. So Itaqui is the main port where soy is exported, often to Europe, from the production regions of Brazil. And the corridor is a train line that runs really from the center of Brazil all the way up the north, several thousand kilometers, before the soy is exported to consumer countries like Germany and others as well. So there's these two geographic focus, the Itaqui corridor and Maranhão as well. And just in terms of context of today's webinar, we've been working, this is the third webinar. So the first two, as I mentioned, were held in September and November 2022. And we had colleagues from the infrastructure sector, from highways, railways, integration terminals and grain terminals, as well as the traders on those first two. We've then had an in-person workshop, firstly in São Luís in Maranhão in December 2022, with colleagues from the state of Maranhão, producers and local actors there as well as international actors, more than 50 people. And the outcome of that piece of work was a roadmap with 19 actions to be executed by 2025. And then there was a second workshop that was held in Brasilia in April 2023, where a group of specialists came together and said, look, what makes sense in terms of a geographical scope for this project? And the proposal there was to work on a jurisdiction, so an agricultural and production jurisdiction that includes issues around deforestation, human rights, governance, etc., starting with the state of Maranhão as well. So that's where the project is progressing, and this webinar is in that context. Finally, just a few words of context about deforestation-free supply chains. There's obviously a massive focus on climate change. I think those of us who read the paper, whether that's in Germany, in Brazil, or anywhere else, climate change is something that's of concern to companies, to individuals. And I think what's particularly striking is how many different organizations are mobilized around climate change. So, what's going to be interesting today is exploring how companies and organizations based in Germany are working towards common aims as well. I think the second point is, to note how the goods that we consume, people are increasingly aware how they have social and environmental impacts, often positive social impacts and environmental impacts as well. So it's important not to rule those out. And soy plays a really important role in Brazil in providing jobs, in creating an agricultural sector that's an important cultural, economic, and social part of Brazilian society as well. But I think the consumers are increasingly interested in and concerned about social and environmental impacts. So that's another key driver to today. And in light of issues around climate change and consumer interest, it's important highlighting, obviously, the EU deforestation regulation that's now come into law, and as of 2025 will be implemented to ensure that the European Union doesn't import commodities linked to deforestation. So I think those are the three pieces of context that's important for us to take into today's discussion. I'm about to hand over to our first speaker, Michelle, but before I do so, I think what we're really encouraging you as listeners today to explore, I think on the one hand is a very practical issue. So it's really exciting today. We have a German company, a very important German retail company that has a very explicit deforestation-free policy and has gone through a process of implementing a tool called the DCF toolkit to ensure that its supply chain is free of deforestation. So that's really interesting for other companies. It's really interesting for other individuals and organizations that are interested in how you develop and implement a policy on DCF supply chains. So the webinar, I think today, firstly, has this very practical feel and element to it. But we also want to explore broader questions around how you transform a sector. And that's when it starts getting tricky, because transformation involves lots of other actors. It involves governments, not just in Europe, but the federal government in Brazil, state government and municipal governments in Brazil and other production countries. It involves farmers themselves. It involves input companies and other actors in the supply chain, traders, etc. And so to really transform, everyone has to move together. And I think one of the things we want to explore today is how, as a starting point, you have a policy in a German company. How can that serve as inspiration and as a mechanism for sector-wide transformation? And what are some of the hurdles to achieve that? So those are the sort of two pieces we're going to be looking at throughout the webinar. And I'd invite you as listeners to bring questions around those two themes, both operational and transformational as well. Super, that's it from me. A reminder that we have simultaneous translation. If you've joined recently, people are still joining. But I think those are the key points we wanted to share for the opening. So without further ado, let me hand over to our first speaker. Michelle Neuhaus is Project Manager for South America at WWF Germany. And Michelle's going to speak a little bit about the experiences of WWF in supporting companies to implement deforestation and conversion-free policies for their supply chains. So Michelle, over to you. A very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, James. I'm going to share my screen with you. Just 1 second. So thank you so much, James, for inviting us. It's an honor for us as WWF, but also for our partners to be here as a guest speaker today in your third webinar. We are going to present as a team today our project. The project is called Tackling the Main Drivers of Deforestation and Conversion in Brazil. I'm going to give a short introduction to the project, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jana. Jana Berschneider will explain a little bit more in detail the project group work we are doing, the challenges of the companies, but also the common vision we are elaborating. And then Jannika Oftadinger from Nexar Consulting will give you a little zoom in into the DCF toolkit, explain a little bit how it works, and what are also maybe the challenges in implementation with the companies. And then, as you said, James, we are very lucky today that our partner Kaufland is joining and giving us some practical insights from their experiences. So, as already mentioned, the name of this very, very important project between WWF and GIZ is Tackling the Main Drivers of Deforestation and Conversion in Brazil. We are working closely together with our partner WWF Brazil. I'm also happy that colleagues are joining this webinar today from WWF Brazil. So feel free to ask some questions regarding our activities, but also to the activities regarding implemented in Brazil. As mentioned, this project is funded by the GIZ on behalf of our German Federal Ministry, the BMZ, and the timeline of the project is more or less 2 years. As we all know, soy is one of the major drivers of deforestation. And here you can see that more than 80% of tropical deforestation is concentrated in these 6 commodities. It's nothing new for us that soy is leading these list of tropical deforestation commodities. And Germany shows that the highest mean, so mean in terms of the different commodities, of tropical deforestation of all the European Union countries. This is why we as Germany have a huge responsibility to tackle this topic. And this is also why we are working together with Brazil, because supply chain work is never a one-way job. We always have to work on the production and consumption side at the same time. And this is why we established this project together with GIZ, focusing on 4 main pillars. The first pillar is implemented in Germany. It's about the engagement of the German supply chain actors. Jana Berschneider will explain us more in detail a little bit later on how this is working. And then at the same time, we have 3 very, very important pillars implemented in Brazil. The first pillar is the creation of a transparency platform with other NGOs. Then WWF Brazil is engaging a lot with financial actors to promote the topic of financial mechanisms. And of course, a monitoring platform is very, very important in the framework of this project for state and subnational policies. And to give you a little bit of an insight what we achieved in the last 2 years, I would like to directly deep dive into our activities. So the main work was to set up a project groups. We started this project group with companies, 5 different companies in the beginning, called Edeka, Kaufland, McDonald's, Dr. Oetker, and Bayersdorf. And we're happy that this year also Rewe joined our project group. And the idea was that together with these companies, we meet on a regular basis every month. And together with them, we are implementing the DCF toolkit. Jannika Oftadinger will explain later on how the DCF toolkit is working. And in the end, in alignment with the AFI criteria, we want to support the companies to establish self-commitments. And these self-commitments go beyond the European Union legislation because they are aligned with the AFI criteria. So this means that regarding the cutoff date, but also regarding the inclusion of other wooded lands at the Cerrado, these company commitments are going beyond what is required from the European Union right now, which is very important to protect the Cerrado and other biomes. At the same time, we set up a working group. We held this working group every 6 months, more or less. Between 40 and 60 stakeholders of the soy supply chain are participating actively in this working group. We are working on different solutions regarding MRV tools, transparency platforms, but also closely together with GIZ on focusing, for example, on the conditions of the European Union legislation's conditions, and to explain them better to important stakeholders and also to companies. At the same time, in the last 1.5 years, we worked strongly on the topic of a strong EU regulation. For example, we built up a statement signed by more or less 80 European companies to push for a stronger EU regulation. And as already mentioned, one of our key aspects is also the topic of consumption. So we are working directly with the end consumer to raise awareness about the link between soy and deforestation in Germany and the responsibility we as German consumers have regarding the topic of deforestation. Here, I want to mention one very important publication. The study is called Entwaldungsfreie und umwandlungsfreie Lieferketten, if you want to practice your German. So deforestation and conversion-free supply chains, challenges, but also solutions by our partner Nextra Consulting. And what is the end? What is the plan until the end of this project? The first part of this project, we want to establish or to publish 2 further studies. The framework of these studies was built up from the feedback from companies. The first study we want to publish is regarding the soy benchmark, and here we directly focus on the compatibility of the 21 standards of the ITC standard map with the conditions of the EU regulation, because sometimes we receive, or not only sometimes, like often we receive the feedback that it's not really clear which certifications are matching with the EU regulation and which not, and so we are trying to help here with more in detail information. The same we are doing with MRV systems, because there we see that we have many different information from the Brazilian side and from the German side regarding MRV tools, but we really want to find out which MRV tools are suitable to cover the whole supply chain between Brazil and Germany. And at the same time, we want to push and to support the other companies, the other 4 companies we are working with, to advance in their self-commitments regarding sustainable and deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. So this is like very briefly what we did in the last 2 years. And now I'm lucky to hand over to Jana, because she's going to explain more in detail what are the challenges of the companies and what is the market demand, let's say. Over to you, Jana.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the introduction. My name is Jana Beerschneider, and I'm manager for sustainable business and markets with a focus on feeding and soil supply chains. And I started in November 21 to organize the contents and the meetings for the working group and project group meetings. And to understand better, or to follow better for you what is meant by the working group and project group meetings, I will give you a brief overview about the structure. And as Michelle already explained, very clear, our project tackling the main drivers of deforestation and conversion in Brazil runs under the GIZ, and is in the working group part. is a part under the FONI, which means in English Protein Feed Forum. So there are, this is a multi-stakeholder forum where many companies along of the whole supply chain met already to discuss for sustainable protein feed. And under this working group, we had a chance to, or under this initiative, we had the chance to make a working group to focus more in detail and discuss in greater intention about deforestation-free soil supply chains. And this is where we meet every 6 months. And at the same time, we started the project group, and the project group is the group with the pioneer companies, which has been mentioned by Michelle and which are also shown on the next slide. If you would like to jump to the next slide, Michelle. Thank you. Here you see again the 6 pioneer companies we work together with. It's McDonald's Biostuff, which is consumer foods, McDonald's System Gastronomy, I think you know them already, and retail, Kaufland, Rewe, and Edeka. And then we have a food processor or a food industry, which is Dr. Oetker, which is really good that we have different companies to share the experiences and to discuss in the group what works very well in supply chain transformation and where do they have main challenges. And in the next slides, I would like to present you more the challenges. We focus on the way to stop deforestation and conversion in our supply chains. So as described, we have many years already efforts to with deforestation and conversion. No, one back, thank you. Because the soy consumption is directly linked to our food behavior in Europe, and especially the embedded soy is here a very difficult case because it's hard to trace back, and there are many traders and processors in the supply chains, and to bring down the requirements for transparent supply chains is really hard at this point. So downstream actors experience already some pressure from the outside, so from stakeholders, but also from other supply chain actors and all from the side of politics, that more transparency is needed and that it's a need to know where
Hi everybody, welcome back. Apologies for a little technical hitch there. Let's give it a couple of minutes because I think people are still joining, and we'll start again. So let's give it one more minute, and we'll go back. We'll go back to Jana shortly. Everybody seems to be coming back to the room, so we'll get started shortly. We just need to assign the interpreters. So if Anna and Mariana could do that. Firstly, apologies, technical hitches happen. We have this wonderful tool, which is the internet, and it doesn't always work exactly as we want. Sometimes we forget how useful and privileged we are to be able to access it. So we're back. I think we've solved the problem of the hitch that we had. So hopefully we can carry on where we left off. Some practical reminders, you do have translation available. We're going to be working in English. And we were working through two colleagues from WWF Germany. Michelle and Jana were explaining their work in supply chain transformation, both in terms of working directly with a range of food industry companies in Germany, but also working across the supply chain and looking at issues around certification, MRV, and multi-stakeholder collaboration, including FONAI. So let's crack on. And Jana, thank you for accepting this small break in your excellent presentation. I'll hand straight back to you. If you'd like to share your screen again and put the slides up. Super.
Thank you.
And back to you.
We'll share the slides again. So thank you very much, Michelle. Perfect. So, okay. So I hope everybody's refreshed now after this short break. Coming back to the downstream actors and their challenges in the supply chain. So they have already their own DCF goals and commitments, but very often these were unsuccessful because there is a lack of management and the detailed goals to really transform the supply chains. And these days we have the pressure from the politics and also from the civil society and from stakeholders to really progress in sustainable and transparent supply chains. And coming to the next point, and the downstream actors face the biggest challenge or face a really big challenge in the supply chain, because it's hard to bring the requirements down along the whole supply chain to the traders and processors and producers. So this can be explained better on the next slide. I will give you an overview about the common structure of the soy supply chain. So here you see a little bit at a form that we try to highlight here a bottleneck, and the bottleneck is the trade, because you see between the retail and the brands at the very end of the supply chain and the upstream supply chain, it's hard to bring the information down what is needed in terms of, for example, data about the production, where's the soybean produced, and which farmer fed a sustainable soy or deforestation-free soy or certified soy. These are all information and data which are not requested now, and therewith it's not handed over in the supply chain. And this is why we have no full transparency today to be really compliant with DCF, deforestation and conversion free soy supply chains. And so the goal is that we support or that we collect the power of the retail and the brands to have one general and homogeneous goal about what is desired at the market, about we would like to have, which is DCF soy. And then hopefully we can bring the message forward about the end producers and the livestock and breeding and the primary processing to the trade. And when the trade then gets the bundled demand of the retailers and the brands, then it's a big leverage to bring them to the transformation and to serve greater volumes for deforestation-free soy. Next slide, please. And therefore, we work with our companies together in the project group with the accountability framework. I don't know how familiar you are with the accountability framework, but for this, I will just explain you in short that the accountability framework is comprised of the core principles and operational guidance and definitions. So if it's too hard for commitments, for example, to make concrete goals and to define which milestones will help me or will support the companies to transform their supply chains, and to follow up which goals are reached and at which points there may be some problems or hurdles to fulfill the goals. The accountability framework beats a really nice set of definitions and also documents and links, which will support the companies to transform step by step their own supply chains. And to get a little bit introduced, we started with our pioneer companies to work with the accountability framework. Despite of that, we also work with the accountability framework because it's a higher level compared to some regional, the EUDR, the European Deforestation Regulation, in ambition to serve deforestation-free and conversion-free supply chains. And the initiation of the AFI is because it's a uniformity structure. It's international, so all companies and also all stakeholders, and international because all countries and continents can work already with the AFI. And it's a living document. So if you see in practice that there are maybe some difficulties which not work in the practical implementation, then there are always some rounds for feedback and review, which makes a really nice basis for an extensive transformation to deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. At the first step, we focused at the green part, set goals at the first part of our project, which is the specification of commitments. So sometimes there were some commitments already in companies, but to specify the goals and to make more concrete definitions, we focused at that point. And at the next steps, we would like, or we also discussed already in the project group about the orange part, which is managed supply chains, and to find out where are already good management systems implemented and at which point we can support the companies. Therefore, we also made the studies mentioned by Michelle, for example, the MRV study about monitoring, reporting, and verification, and the standards benchmark, that we find out how we can support the companies on their path to the transformation of their supply chains best as possible. Next slide, please. And yeah, challenges are also the actual mechanisms. I mentioned already the EU deforestation regulation, and all of you are aware of certification mechanisms. And both are very important and very helpful mechanisms, but it needs to be clear, and we often mention this also in our working group and project group, that certifications and the EUDR are part of the solution, but it's not the solution itself. So it's not a comprehensive conversion of supply chains to deforestation and conversion-free soil cultivation. So this is why we say we have an orientation, and it's a first step if companies work already with certifications. But for example, there are not enough certified volumes at the market to serve the whole European Union or Germany with certified soy. And it's a big advantage also for companies if they have the insights of their own supply chain to step in if they see that there are some threats or some problems. It's better that they have the full control by themselves of their supply chains. And therefore, a segregation of the supply chains is something very important to serve really deforestation freeness of their supply chains. And the EU deforestation regulation is also very important, pushes our movement very, very much. Here, we have still 18 months written because the presentation was prepared earlier. I think it's still now 70 months we have. So I think there's a big pressure on the companies to implement the EUDR. And we would like to support them as best as we can to fulfill the goals till 2025 towards deforestation-free supply chains. And the EUDR addresses a lot of important points, but there are some important points missing, like, for example, that there are no protection of other wooded land, which is a really vulnerable and important ecosystem. And this is why companies are really asked and needed to go beyond regulations like the EUDR. And next slide. Now we come to the point how we would like to achieve the DCF vision. So I tried to explain you already in the graph of the supply chain that we try to bundle the demand, because with the whole market the whole market have one clear message and one clear definition of what they understand, and in terms of sustainable deforestation-free and conversion-free supply chain, then there's a chance that we can swap the market to segregated and DCF supply chains. And therefore, we need all the different parts we mentioned already. This is certification, and this is the EUDR, as well as strong individual commitments and all the different initiatives we already know, which are related to deforestation-free soy or other deforestation-free products and critical products to deforestation. And this is why we focusing on the soy manifest to bring or to unite the private sector of the in a German manifesto, and to bring the message on the right point, and also to include then other actors of the supply chain into the soy manifest, and transform or shift the market then towards DCF supply chains. So this is it so far from my side, and at this point I am happy to hand over to Jannika Ofterdinger. Welcome, and thank you very much for your attention. And to you.
Thanks for that handover, Jana. Yes, Jannika Ofterdinger, I'm coming from Nextra Consulting side, as already introduced. We've been supporting the WWF within the project that Michelle and Jana were talking about, and also work ourselves on the topic of DCF, so deforestation conversion-free supply chains. In the next few minutes, I want to take the time to look into what we did within the project group for the consultancy part of it. So meaning we had this project group, we had the working group, but we had this hands-on time with the companies also to look at the management systems and actually get going on the whole aim of getting DCF. You already know this graph. Jana just talked about it. It is the new graph of the AFI, of the Accountability Framework Initiative. And even if you can see here, there's already practical things that are addressed often, companies still kind of struggle to put this into practice, what it actually means for them and what it means for their entire management system. So knowing of this gap, the WWF some years ago developed a toolkit, which is the DCF implementation toolkit. Feel free to click on the next slide, which is actually a toolkit to support the companies for the implementation. It's nothing that just we've done in Germany. You see here a lot of logos of companies that have gone through the toolkit approach, which are not German companies. They are Brazilian companies and from the US. So it's really an approach that is spread around the globe, which is also in the thought of the AFI, really, because as Jana mentioned, that whole initiative works for having the same language, having the same approaches, so different actors across the supply chain actually speak the same language and can interact and lever what they want to achieve. So you see the first line here are our 6 companies within the project group. that we went through in the implementation toolkit. I want to give you a bit of an insight what we did there. It's a 3-stage process, which is pretty straightforward, starting with the assess phase, so knowing where you actually stand and where you come from, coming to the plan phase of creating milestones, creating a really time-bound plan of where you want to go, and then coming to the execution phase, which is pretty much a lifelong task, which is carrying on to keep your supply chains deforestation conversion free. You also see there materials, no, that's fine, thanks, that accompany all of those different phases. The first one is a DCF assessment tool and a summary of assessment results, which I'm going to dive in later. And there's also templates for the implementation plan, as there also is a DCF technical reference document, which is also publicly available, which kind of summarizes known projects, initiatives, resources that could assist you in one or the other question that you're working on as a company. So we started off with phase 1, with the assess phase. Feel free to carry on the next slide, please. And we looked at those 5 dimensions of supply chain management. These 5 dimensions are really structuring the whole toolkit for the assess phase, but also for the planning phase. And I want to give you a little bit of an overview what the different topics mean. It's the DCF alignment starting at the top, which really is about is there a business case built for that deforestation topic? Is there a commitment set for the company? So really kind of the baseline for addressing the deforestation issue. Then we come to the risk profile dimension, which is about starting to map your supply chain, analysis of the risk that are inherent in your supply chain and what kind of supplier you have in your supply chain. So actually knowing about what supply chain you have and where you stand. Then we have the internal operations. This is really going into the structure of the company. So what are the government structures in the company look like? How the departments work with each other or work not with each other to facilitate the work on DCF supply chain. So really looking into the corporate itself. Then we have the supplier engagement as the 4th dimension, which is probably quite self-explanatory. So it takes a look of internal cooperation to your supply chain, to your suppliers. What are they doing? Where are they struggling? How can we help to transform? And this is a really key part of the accountability framework, also in contrast to the EODR. Whereas the EODR is about either you do or you don't have DCF supply chains. The AFI approach is really about lending a hand, supporting each other, working on that transformation to actually come to the goal of what we all long for in the conversion-free soy supply chains. And monitoring, verifying, and reporting is the last dimension here, which also speaks for itself. So in the time monitoring, how is your performance, how is the performance of your suppliers, are there options to verify whatever the supply is, also the reporting on it, so have public reports available for different stakeholders, so it is a public information where you're standing and where you're lacking on the path and journey to DCF supply chains. So this is really the key structure of that whole toolkit. And feel free to move on. Coming back to the process of how we approached it, we sent out a DCF tool or an Excel tool, which was about gathering the data of where do you stand in those different points. So there were options to have the general answers, but also options to give them some more context and comments. We also assisted with interviews to actually know deeper of where the companies were struggling, where they were standing, to have a proper status quo picture. And from this developed, and this is, thank you, on the next slide, the summary of results on the right here. So that was a quite a quite detailed overview of the status quo and what the main recommendations of this are. So we have the status quo as an executive summary, as also the detailed version where the companies were able to dive deeper into where they can have further information how to proceed in one or the other topic. I brought you an kind of overview of how that status quo executive summary sheet looks like, if you want to proceed to the next slide, because that was found very helpful of many of the companies. So this is just an example. Don't bother to look at where the red, green, or yellow dots are. It's just to tell you, you see here 5 different columns. These are the 5 dimensions I was just guiding you through. And all of those dimensions have different key actions that I was just trying to wrap up before. And it shows you where the company is currently standing. So do we already have a risk assessment? How to proceed in our supply chain mapping? And as apparent this may seem, it was one of the most helpful exercises to actually have an understanding about what does it actually need for a downstream company to come to DCF supply chains. It's not just about getting that certification off the shelf. It is about looking at my own structures, my purchasing systems, and looking at my suppliers and working together with them. Maybe go to the next slide already. Go into that planning phase. And maybe also the next slide, because you already know that 3-step process. What we did in the planning phase was we had deep dive workshops for each and every one of those 5 dimensions, which were about really strengthening of that understanding, what lies beyond those headlines that you now see. How could you usually as a company proceed in those different topics, and then get into a conversation. How does in that particular case how does the process look like? What are potential milestones that we can already set for the next few years? I mean, when you're talking about the ambition level of the AFI, the target is to reach DCF supply chains by 2025. So it's pretty straightforward to see, okay, if this is our end result of 2025, what are the steps that we need to achieve on our journey until then to actually be in the place. So that was really what those workshops were about. And then we put together also in that template provided by the toolkit a first draft of how implementation steps can look alike for the companies to further detail and put into practice. Exactly. We come to the last slide, and that, like I said, is the lifelong phase of execution. We have that material, the DCF technical references there to support companies on what they're actually doing in the different steps. So it has some resources that you can dig into. But which is probably more interesting is the next slide. It is what the companies thought about going through this process. No need to look into all of those quotes directly, but the main opinion of going through the DCF approach was a really helpful overview of understanding what the to-dos are, where the status quo is, where the hurdles are, and also within our project group get an understanding of where are the joint hurdles, where do we need to work together, because it's really challenging, as mentioned before by Jana and Michelle, to have that transparency issue all the way down all the supply chain. So having that complexity and having that joint hurdle, getting into a conversation and creating industry initiatives is also lined out by Jana, going to that manifesto's thought, was a really nice outcome out of this exercise. And the companies have now a structured start to look further into their DCF strategies. But from practical side, I'm sure you already see the Kaufland quote here in the center. Melanie Bourgnon will also give a further insight. So without further ado, I probably hand over to James before, and thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Yannicka. Thanks as well to Michelle and Jana. Really exciting and really clear, and almost seems simple, right? So I think we're going to now hear from the experience of Melanie at Kaufland in implementing a policy like this. And obviously, in reality, it's quite challenging, and I think it's going to be really exciting to hear from her. Before I hand over to Melanie, just a reminder that we are taking questions for our panelists. So we've already received a question from Jacko, a really interesting question about compatibility between the DCF toolkit and the EU deforestation regulation. So we'll come back to that. But do use this opportunity now to post your questions into chat, and we'll try and include those that we can when we have a discussion with our panelists as well. So Melanie Banvignot is Senior Consultant in Animal Welfare, Deforestation, Free Supply Chains and Sustainable Feed at Kaufland. She'll say a little bit more about Kaufland as a retailer, but you'll probably know it better as the organization that runs Lidl, one of the main supermarket chains in Europe and beyond. So Melanie, a really warm welcome. We're really excited about hearing about your experience of implementing these policies here. I'll hand over to you and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, James. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the chance to share my... Do you see my screen now?
Yeah, that's clear. Just put it on presentation mode and we see it.
And share our experiences. So I'm responsible for animal welfare and deforestation-free supply chains, and especially soy in feed. And so let me introduce Kaufland first to give you a better picture of who is Kaufland and what are we doing. So Kaufland is part of the Schwarz Group, and besides Lidl, there is also the Schwarz production. We are a production of beverages, chocolates, baked goods, ice cream, coffee, pasta, and we also have a paper mill. We have PreZero, which is taking care of recycling, and the Schwarz Group, which has Schwarz Digital, Lidl Online, and the marketplace of Kaufland. And Kaufland as itself is operating in 8 countries. It's Germany, it's the Czech Republic, it's Slovakia, it's Croatia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Moldova. And so we are operating in the middle and in the Eastern Europe. We're a big food retailer, and we're having a big assortment as well as needs for the everyday use in the non-food assortment. So we make it possible for everyone to purchase good, healthy, and sustainable products. That's our goal. We have 1,500 stores, 155,000 employees, 17 logistic centers, 5 meat processing centers in Germany as well as in the Czech Republic. And as I mentioned before, we're operating in 8 countries. And first of all, I would like to just explain to you how we started off with our soy strategy before we started working with Jannika and the WWF in the project group of deforestation and conversion-free soy. As it is very often, and it's helpful for us as a big retailer, there was a publication of an assessment of retailers and the work on sustainable soy in Germany from a German NGO in July 2021. And the status until then was that we were a member in the FONI, like Jana explained before, and we have been signing the Cerrado Manifest as well as the Eurocommerce commitment. And so the assessment on our work of soy was not really state of the art, and it was not really the front runners. So it was clear that we had to do something about our strategy. So we were working on the strategy. We were looking for possible certifications. We were checking supply chain models. We were informing ourselves about other alternative feeds. We were doing risk analysis. We were doing competitor analysis. And of course, it's always important for retailer as well. we were calculating the costs of sustainable soy. And all that information we gathered, and we presented it to the board, and got the approval for our soy strategy. And so after that, we had an internal briefing for all the directors of the purchasing departments for all our countries, and as well for Germany. And Germany is the biggest country we have and that we are working in. So it's important for us that our purchasing departments know what the soy strategy is all about, as well as the CSR departments, because they have to transfer the knowledge into their countries. And at the end of 2021, we were also writing our soy strategy. That was our first commitment we made public. And in the end of 2021, we were also beginning to search for third-party providers who are taking care of the soy mapping and the risk analysis. So we were searching, we made assessments, and it was also important to make contracts with. So our commitment is from the 1st January of 2022 to have conversion-free soy in feed for our private label animal-based products. Now I'm going to talk about our work in the project group. So we were beginning to work in March 2022 until June this year. We were meeting monthly, as already mentioned, and we were applying the DCF toolkit. And it also helped us to analyze our own supply chain, and we were preparing ourselves for the commitment of the AFI, and Jannika was helping us to just point out the hurdles we have with the practical implementation. And when we learned about the project group, we were really pleased that you were offering something like that, because it really helped us in our daily work. We got really helpful information about the EU regulation for DCF supply chains, also the perspective of the WWF, and we were discussing about current topics. And here, one example is the sector commitment of the QS Soja Plus. And for the audience, I might have to explain that 98% of our meat, of pig and poultry, as well as beef, is audited by QS. And it's mostly used for a hygiene audit. But here we managed to implement certifications. It's starting in January 2024. And so it was a really hard work and hard discussions, because there were, of course, different interests. And but we're happy that now the certification will be implemented in the existing audit processes of QS. And so we were talking about challenges of soy and the supply chains and possible solutions. We had presentations of possible service providers and companies working on the topic of sustainable soy. And of course, in that project group, we were sharing best practices, and we were having networking events. Just for example, the FONI meeting, the Protein Meat Forum. And so the hands-on work Jannika was talking about was just the application of the DCF assessment toolkit, so the Excel sheet you saw just earlier. she was doing on a regular basis interviews for us to support us, to answer the questions and to fill in the toolkit just regarding the steps assess, plan, and execute. And we were able to have a nice summary of the results. And we got recommendations for our further steps. And Janica also helped us to review and to update our soy strategy. So the position paper, which you can find online on our website. And I'd like to give you a short overview of our current status. So we committed ourselves to have no deforestation or conversion of valuable ecosystems for soy by 2025, according to the AFI criteria. And so this is counting for our private label products of animal origin. So our goal for now is 100% GMO and DCF-free soy in feed. And we'd like to prefer the origin of the EU. Of course, it's not possible for 100%, but it's preferred. And if we import soy in feed, or let's say our suppliers and the fattening farmers, so we would like to have Donau soy, Terra and RTRS certification systems. We also have projects to reduce soy in animal feed, and we're working on reducing the soy in the feed, as well as using alternatives. So in 2022, we started to work on our commitment, and we had to do book and claim. So we calculated what's used, what amount is used, what soy equivalents are used for our whole private label sector, animal-based. And we buy protein partnerships from Donau soy, as well as ProTerra, GMO-free. And for 2023, we're doing that as well. And in addition to that, we also included the processed food like the deep frozen food. So we expanded our variety of private labels. So it's much more complicated to get down to that supply chain. So regarding segregated soy, it's clear at the moment that we can only work on pilot projects. So for Croatia, for example, we have an animal welfare label with farmers who do produce animal welfare meat, pig meat, and the farmers are cultivating their own soy there. In Germany, we also have an animal welfare range. They have 90 farmers. And here, from September this year on, they're only using certified soy, so Donau soy, ProTerra, or RTRS soy for fish, for salmon, for the whole international purchasing department. We can say that they are mainly certified. For poultry, for example, for the whole Germany poultry, which is sold in our stores, we know that they are completely certified. And now you can see that I have to talk about really different ranges, and only just telling you the status is really variant. So, and the last point, like I already mentioned, from January on 2024, the DCF soy is implemented in the QS standard, which is really a big achievement. So in 2024, we are planning the following steps. Of course, we cannot exit from book and claim, unfortunately not. We're trying to expand the physical traceable soy. I'm talking regularly with our meatworks, with our meat departments for ways or ranges we can switch. And I have already ranges in mind. We would like to work on the reduction and alternatives for the German pig sector. I can tell you that we have now we have 20% of those 90 farmers which are already feeding with alternatives. We want to do research on feeding for byproducts from the food industry. That means that, for example, now somebody has to help me with Hafer. What's Hafer in English? I have no idea. So it's a vegetarian.
I think it's oats.
Oh, it's oats. Thank you. Oat from the oatmeal. So from oats, we're doing research on the byproducts for our oat drink, and we would like to use it. It's also a food waste topic instead of soy. Of course, we have projects on the soil management and regenerative agriculture, so working on the ground, and we have projects working on the CO2 reduction. So talking about initiatives in Brazil, we are talking with sustainable investment for the next year to work together with sustainable investments. I don't know if you know them. It's a project where farmers are given quite nicer loans, just with the if they guarantee that they are not deforesting their land, which they could normally deforest legally. And we would further like to participate in initiatives. And regarding the EUDR, of course, we are standing in front of the work that we have to develop our DCF strategy, not only talking about soy, but about the other commodities as well. So the big challenges are, of course, and it's understandable, the conflicts of interest between the animal feed industry and the growing industry and the food retail. And our big hustle is the transparency in the supply chain. We still have a lot of big suppliers who do not even respond to our questions when we're asking into the supply chain. And now that the EU regulation is there and there is a fixed date for next year, it's quite hard to motivate the suppliers to work on earlier commitments. And also, we would like to have stronger commitments in Brazil. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. And other than that, I'd like to hand over back again to James.
Great, thanks so much, Melanie. And perhaps we can bring down the presentation and invite all the panelists onto our panel now. So Melanie, Yannicka, Jana, Michelle, and Petra, thank you so much for your words to open the session today. And thanks to colleagues who are listening. We've got some questions coming in here, so let's try and organize those as we go forward. I think perhaps the way we can organize this, I think we can perhaps talk about the more operational piece first. And there's some interesting questions that have come in there as well, including on compatibility with EU DR. And then maybe this question that is being touched upon in chat, and I think the number I've talked about, is the whole issue around traceability. How do you guarantee effective transparency and traceability in the supply chain? What are the challenges to that? And then I think linked to that, the whole point that you've raised, Melanie, around segregated supply chains. So let's maybe take those two blocks, an operational part first, and then we'll go into transparency and segregation. But colleagues who are listening, feel free to bring in your questions. Just on that first part, then, my suggestion is that we do the following. I think, Yannicka, maybe we can go back to you first and ask you around this question that's been raised around the compatibility between the DCF toolkit and the EU deforestation regulation. I think Michele and Jana will then come back to you, and I've got a couple of questions really around how you effectively mobilize the sector. So it's really interesting to see the number of companies that you've set out there. How have you gone about that? And is there a difference between, say, a retail company like Kaufland, a brand like McDonald's, a food industry company as well? How do these different companies approach this? Is it one size fits all, or is it quite different? I'm interested in that. And Melanie, at the end of that, I'd love to come back to you and just ask you about the plan to source soy from the EU. And my question is a simple one. Isn't that crazy expensive? So, have you done the maths on that? What does that look like? I'd love to hear more about that. So let's start with those, and then we'll talk about the segregation and the transparency as more questions come in. So Yannicka, over to you first. Tell us a little bit more about this challenge of compatibility between the toolkit and EUDR.
Yeah, thanks, James, and thanks for the question. Of course, it's been an issue, but the question, is the DCF toolkit really helpful? Because now the EUDR is coming, is a bit of the question, do we need a plan to address the EUDR, yes or no? Because, I mean, the toolkit that we went through with the companies is really like the basic process to form a strategy. And lots of the contents and lots of the topics that are inside the accountability framework are one-on-one topics that are connected to the EUDR. So as the regulation leaves a lot of questions open, like how do we pretty much do anything of this? How do we do the geolocation? How do we do the due diligence? How do we do the different responsibilities that the actors have across the supply chain? The AFI is a platform that serves sharing best practices and sharing insights in how things can be addressed and how to do things. So it can actually be a tool to help to implement the EUDR, because the regulatory framework is coming, but there's still the need to implement it. And the question how to implement it is part of that DCF toolkit. And then maybe one last remark. The EUDR is focusing really strongly on that product focus. So it has that focus, is my supply chain clean? Do I have the data to actually prove that it is? The accountability framework goes one step further. It obviously also has that product focus, but it also adds the supplier focus. So not just saying, what am I buying, but who am I buying from? What are those actors doing in their entire portfolio? How can we actually go forward and have the transformation of that entire actor in our supply chain? And as the third pillar, we also have that whole topic of local initiative, of jurisdictional approaches. What can companies do to actually support the transformation where the products are produced? So Melanie was touching upon this, as Kaufland now looks into financing mechanisms that actually focus on Brazil, focus on helping farmers to have that whole geolocation and proving that their work deforestation free, facilitated and actually incentivized, and make it also work financially. So the AFI and the toolkit goes beyond, but it can also help to put the EUDR into place. It's a lever for each other. Excellent.
Thanks, Yannicka. And I would just encourage us to carry on some of these dialogues in chat if we want to as well. So Yannicka, if you have anything else to add, or if the colleague who made the question wants to go deeper, then we can carry them on in chat. So let's go to this issue about how you mobilize different companies. Michele, maybe we can start with you. Perhaps you could say a few words about how this experience has been. You talked about the German platform that's available. You talked about a German manifesto. say a little bit more perhaps around the successes and challenges in mobilization. And Jana, maybe you can complement that by describing if it's a one-size-fits-all approach or if there's different approaches for different companies.
Yeah, sure, James. What I can share with you is that in the beginning of the project, I perceived kind of a skepticism from some companies if, for example, the work in the DCF toolkit is a lot of work, is more work than they had to do, if it fits with the regulation of the European regulation and so on. And also maybe regarding to the question that you wanted to ask Jana, that not all the companies are on the same level, right? So this was a kind of a trust building process from the beginning. But I would say that coming closer to the implementation of the EU regulation, we feel a lot of demand to transfer knowledge regarding, for example, the conditions of the EU legislation. So right now we have the feeling that we have to organize more and more these kind of platforms, and that there is a rising demand, let's say, from the companies. At the same time, I would say that generally, I can comment that we see on the one hand the compromises between Amazonian countries to zero deforestation, and at the same time we see the efforts from the European Union. And I think that these efforts from the same, let's say, at the same time, create a momentum for these kind of platforms. The platform we are using with FONA, but maybe also platforms as these webinars, because we're going beyond the discussion between NGOs and between governments, because we are directly, let's say, combining companies to each other and improving the dialogue between also other stakeholders. So from these two perspectives, I would say that there is a growing demand, although from the beginning it's not easy if you're not on the exact same page. And here maybe I can hand over to Jana regarding the question of the same level of the companies from the beginning. I think you're mute, Jana, or at least I cannot hear you. Yeah, now it works.
I can't hear you, Jana. We'll maybe come back to you in a couple of minutes. We'll test your sound. Let's go straight on to Melanie. So Melanie, a couple of questions for you. One is the point I raised earlier around sourcing directly from the EU and the cost of that. There's a question in chat as well from Alini. She's just asked about giving more details around the Kaufland commitments at the field level initiatives in Brazil. Where are they happening? And could you say a bit more about that, please? And then we'll come back to Jana.
Okay, so I'm starting off with the commitment for the EU. To start off now, I have to say that most of the part of the deforestation soy is coming through protein partnerships from the EU, which is quite simple because it has no impact to our direct supply chain. And so, of course, we have the challenge now to implement our strategy into the direct supply chain, which is going to be really difficult, especially for pig. And also, like you've seen, our strategy is going to have a GMO-free supply chain, which is even more difficult and even more expensive. So just to switch it to the deforestation-free is just a smaller part than the GMO-free part regarding the costs. And so this is going to be a challenge, and I'm quite sure that the origin of the EU is going to be split by different, let's say, scenarios for each country. For Germany, for example, talking about salmon internationally and Germany only poultry, we do have deforestation-free soy at the moment implemented already. So, but for pig, I'm not so sure if we can hold that achievement. So for now, it's standing there. We prefer the EU origin, but it might be that we have to change. And now talking about the commitments in Brazil, we were talking with sustainable investment management, so SIM, and we would like, we presented it to all the directors internally at Kaufland, but now it needs to be approved by the board. But how do you say, the signs are quite positive. So it's not really approved yet, but the model is that farmers in the Cerrado, which are chosen by that company, and they are also monitored by WWF in Brazil, as well as other NGOs. And there's also Earth Daily monitoring, like the geo data is going to be observed and controlled, that there will be no deforestation after 2020. And so the farmers are going to be chosen by SIM. They have to have their fields in the Cerrado. They have to have no deforestation of legal land which could be deforested, and then they're going to be able to get loans which are 20% less than the normal ratings. And so it's kind of a financial incentive for the farmers to reject from legal deforestation. That's what the project is all about.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Sounds super interesting, and some really important partners there. So I hope, Aline, I hope that answers your question, and would encourage you to reach out directly to Melanie if you want to know more. My suggestion is we have about 10 more minutes. So what I'd like us to do is go a little bit deeper into the theme of segregation and transparency. That's a question that's been raised in chat as well, and I think by a number of our speakers. And then we'll do a short wrap up and close as well. So thanks everyone for your time here. Just to be clear what we mean by segregation, right? So I guess people on this call are familiar with that idea, but segregation means that if a company like Kaufland buys soy from Brazil that is deforestation free, they know that they're buying specifically a soy grain that enters their supply chain that has been produced on a piece of land where there hasn't been deforestation, different to mass balance or other approaches where you can get certification or credits to know that somewhere a soybean has been produced on deforestation conversion free, but it isn't necessarily the same soybean that enters your supply chain. So when we talk about segregation, that's what we mean. When we talk about traceability and transparency, what we mean is how does a company like Kaufland actually know that that soybean that they've segregated, how can they trace it all the way back to the farmer and know that they can confidently tell their consumers that that is a deforestation-free bean. It's quite challenging because the soy supply chain is very long and complex, and soy is often changes hands several times before it reaches a company like Kaufland as well. So let's explore that. I think the question in chat that we saw from Gemma was really around the transparency question, but I think we can really address these two issues together, and I think they come very closely. I think Jana and Yannick, I know that you've got experience of sort of implementing transparency policies and guaranteeing segregation. So can you tell us a little bit more perhaps about how you see that working? What can other companies, in addition to Kaufland, do? And then we'll go on to Michelle and Melanie to add their thoughts as well. Really the challenges and how you overcome them to guaranteeing traceability and transparency. And what does it really mean to segregate, and does that increase costs? I think is one of the kind of key areas we're interested in exploring here. So Jana, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think now I'm back. You can hear me?
Yeah, super.
Perfect.
And
okay,
if you want to go back to your point, the point you wanted to share earlier about mobilization of the sector, feel free. Apologies for not coming back to you on that.
No, all good. I think I can combine both questions, because I think the standpoint where the company started where relatively the same. So there were already some commitments in place, but what was missing was sometimes the clear definitions, which is really hard to define what will be reached. And this is why we tried to implement with them together the accountability framework, because it's much more easier if all the companies try to focus or to align at one and the same definitions. For example, for what is meant by deforestation, what is meant by conversion. And if this is done very individual, you will never have an impact and a change in the supply chain, because then it's too hard to serve small volumes, and we want to reach the big volumes to have here a general change towards to segregated supply chains. If you define this individual, or if companies define it individual, then we have a concept like, for example, with the certification standards that you have. For example, you decide, I would like to have only European soy, and you go for European soy certification. Then you have reached definitely something very worthful, and you have you have then in this case, for example, stopped for these volumes the deforestation in Brazil, but the really big impact is missing. And we would like to achieve a really big impact for long term, and to stop deforestation till 2025 and conversion completely. And this is why we see that it's the most important thing to speak the same language across all the actors in the supply chain, and to bring one clear message also to the traders who serve. It's only 3 or 4 big traders who serve the market with the soy products. And this is if we get the clear message to them to transform their supply chains towards this DCF requirements we demand from them, then I think we have the big chance to have the whole transformation. And this, therefore, the role of the European Union is really, really big as a main importer of deforestation. So, and coming now to the part of book and claim models and mass balance models and segregation. So book and claim was a nice idea to get a step into the first or to get a step into the right way to transform into sustainable soy, but it's not correlated to the physical product. So it's a paper business. You pay for the paper that you have, that you support the sustainable production, which is great, but then you need to go on. It's not a stopping process. So if you implemented or you bought credits via book and claim, then the next step has to be mass balance, that you have partially segregated and partially not certified volumes. So this is the next step. And today we should be already with segregated supply chains. But what we did, or what the market did, was that there were so many demands for deforestation-free or sustainable soy that it never developed. And it's not at the moment, or it's really too late to decide now if you would like to go for the supply chain model, book and claim or mass balance. It's too late. So we really have to focus and to work now to on segregated supply chains, because only then we get the information from the origin and from the production of the product we have in our supply chains. And so this is the storyline behind this different models. So book and claim was good 10 years before, but not today. It's too late to start with book and claim and the mass balance. So we have to go for segregation to really stop deforestation.
Janneke.
Yeah, thanks, James. Maybe just add on what Jana just elaborated. I think talking about the traceability issue and also about segregation is really taking a step back and having the vision, like how would a market look that would work, and where we can actually prove that the soy is DCF. And For this, I think it's very important to differentiate between identity preserved and segregated supply chains. So it's not the aim to know I have this soybean exactly from that field, but to know this soybean has not been mixed with other soybeans where we don't know the origin and where we don't know where if deforestation happened or not. I mean, this is also the thought of the deforestation regulation coming up in the EU. And it is really challenging to be implemented from downstream perspective as from upstream perspective. And I find it very interesting that it is moving Brazil so much, even though the EU market is just one of few when it comes to the Brazilian soy sector. But I think for me, it's key to understand that that UDR is really can't be seen as just a hurdle, but to be like a really important impetus to finally have some kind of movement to maybe get to those geolocation data and get further along the whole traceability issue. Because otherwise, for downstream companies sitting in Germany at the moment, it's not a decision of if do we want to know where it's from or we don't. Even if you do want to know it, it's still almost impossible to go through that complexity and actually have the data along the supply chain managed.
Thanks, Michelle. And then Melanie, do you have anything to add around this debate on segregation, costs, and transparency?
I think Yannick can, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
Just adding some more challenges we have is the MRV tools that we're going to get involved. So so we know now certification is one opportunity. All this certification schemes, not only for soy, but for the other commodities as well. They're working on getting their certified commodities traceable. And that's also something, yes, we're now the whole supply chain is working on. So now, Michelle.
Thank you. I actually also wanted to mention the challenge with the MRV systems and the whole topic of the compatibility between information and data around the world. This is, I think, very important, that the first step is always to have common definition and understanding of what we are talking about. But then the next step is also to see and analyze where are already arising solutions and pilot projects, and where can we scale them up and make them compatible for different countries.
Great, thank you. Super. These are really dense subjects, right? We could probably be here for several hours, I think, debating and discussing segregation and the costs and the challenges of that. But I certainly am coming away here with some optimism in the way that I think the EUDR, you know, from a Brazilian perspective, I work in Brazil, and I think there is some pushback against it, and that's always healthy. But I think, as our speakers have said here, it's really provoking change in a way that, you know, there's a legal obligation, so companies are really getting involved, and they're really addressing how you execute and operationalize a really big challenge, which is traceability in the soy supply chain. So there's movement happening, and movement in a collective and positive direction as well. I think what I'd like to do just to close is just invite our panelists to say one or two brief words of insight. So what are you taking away from this panel itself? I know that our participants are taking away lots of new information, lots of questions as well. We haven't been able to answer all the questions, but thanks for those of you who've posted them. I think the question about references for ports, I don't feel as though we've got the capacity to answer that on this panel here. But reach out to me, to Ricardo from WWF, who's here in the room as well, and we'll see how we can explore that, because I know that RTRS and GIZ have been working with the Port of Itaqui, and so we'd be happy to help you find references for other ports that have addressed that challenge of segregation, right, without it becoming extortionately costly. So perhaps we can just take our speakers in reverse order, and if you'd like to just share a final insight with us, that would be super. Melanie, Yannicka, Jana, and then Michelle, and then we'll close here today.
Actually, I'd just like to thank WWF as well as Nextra just for the work we did together, and just to have a common ground to start from, and to work together on the upcoming challenges we still are facing.
Yannicka?
Yeah. I think my really interesting takeaway for me is how much the EUDR also shakes Brazil, because of course it shakes companies here, but then it is a key topic that you also stumble about. And I think my key message for companies struggling with the regulatory pressure, with also their own commitments to get DCF, is don't wait for that silver bullet to come. It's messy out there, and there are a lot of challenges, but it's the moment to actually get started and get into the conversation, to get the transformation going, and to actually have a successful implementation of that regulatory framework, and maybe lever it even higher to biomes that are not included at the moment, and locations across the world that are not the EU. So that would be my final wrap up.
Thank you, Yannicka. So I go on, and yeah, so from my point of view, and work with the companies and the project and working group together, I have to say that I think to have an open communication together was very important. Until today, we learned a lot from each other in the discussions in our working group and project group round. And I would like to force also that companies have to be brave to go towards to the transformation of their supply chain. So I really would like to mention that it's good to have our pioneer companies. So thank you at this point that we have the companies who supported us and went with us on the journey. And I hope that much more companies see that their individual power is really important to force the transformation towards deforestation-free supply chain. So yeah, that's my words for the end. So thank you very much at this point. And Michelle, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Jan. I just want to add that we should use this momentum that we have right now, that were created by the Amazon countries, but also from the European side regarding the legislation, to create spaces like these to discuss, to transfer knowledge. And for that, we need partnerships. We need partnerships between GIZ, WWF, other NGOs, and at the same time with the private sector. So thank you so much for inviting us. And I'm handing over to you, James.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think one of my takeaways is that positive change is definitely happening. I think we have to be patient. And sector-wide transformation takes time and requires not just action, but a lot of listening. I think, you know, again, from a Brazil's perspective, we need to make sure we're making changes with our eyes wide open and that there aren't perverse effects of regulation. As in, you know, one of the possible scenarios is that soy from the south of Brazil, where deforestation happened historically much longer ago, then supplies the European market, thereby increasing the operational costs of a supply chain because it has to travel further and not addressing deforestation. I think we're all aware of some of these kind of potential perverse effects, and we're all working on addressing them. You know, addressing them involves, again, sector-wide mobilization, involving the traders, speaking to China, and involving China. But the EUDR is, I guess, both an inspiration and a challenge, right? And that's a good thing. So we're all working in that direction collectively to try and make that change happen. Just to close, let me say thank you. Thank you to everybody who's stayed the course of today's webinar. I think it's been fascinating. And thank you for your patience when we had a technical hitch as well. Thank you so much to Melanie, Yannicka, Jana, and Michelle for your time, for your eloquence, and for your descriptions and experience today. It's very generous of you to share them, and it's been really important. Practical messages: we are recording, and the video will be available on the GIZ YouTube channel, so do share that with colleagues as well. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. So there's going to be one in September on financial instruments and another one in November on traders and logistics of the Itaqui corridor. So do join us for those, and thanks for your time today. Bye, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.